Congratulations, you were just born into a samurai family on a tranquil spring morning when cherry blossoms bloomed and the cooing of doves echoed through the village. But don't get lost in dreams. People aren't celebrating you because you're a baby. They're celebrating because you're a boy, the firstborn son, the so-called spare soul of the entire clan. Within 10 minutes of your first cry, the midwife declared, "Strong spirit, eyes wide open, born a warrior." In other words, you've been knighted without anyone asking your opinion. For the first 3 days, you don't get a name. The family waits to see if you survive the sensitive phase, because infants in the Edo period had a higher death rate than samurai in battle. Luckily, you live, not thanks to medicine, but to the ancestors' blessings. You're named Ranmaru, the one who carries the light of the clan, a name both concise and heavy, with emperor-level pressure. For the first 7 days, you're carried to the courtyard for a sun-greeting ritual, not to bask, but to connect your spirit with heaven and earth. In other words, you're sunbathing, naked, on a bamboo mat, in the cold. But if you sneeze, it's not the weather's fault, it's because you lack samurai spirit. By the second week, your grandfather, a retired samurai with a face as stern as stone, orders the ancestral sword placed beside your cradle. To familiarize him with duty, he says, "Your mother, she has no say." Women in samurai families aren't allowed to interfere with training men, even if the man is a newborn. When you turn 1 month old, the village gathers for your first step ceremony. You're lifted and placed on a mat with the clan's emblem. Everyone claps, you spit up milk. They laugh, saying courage overflowing. You can't walk, but you know your father's gaze hasn't softened since. He doesn't see you as a child, he sees you as a seedling that must grow into a sword. When you cry, you're not comforted. Learn to regulate emotions, your father says, his hands still in training armor, veins bulging like ropes. Your early years have no toys. There's a mini wooden sword, a ceramic ancestor statue, and scrolls teaching proper greeting angles. Every day is a test. How long you sit straight, how many rice grains you eat without spilling, whether you bow correctly when your father passes. No rewards, just a brief nod, or a tap on the head with a paper fan if you mess up. The only one who secretly gives you a sweet plum is your grandmother, until she's forbidden, because it weakens the future will of the nation. At 3, you get your first haircut, head shaved in the center, sides left in a chonmage style. You look in a water basin and think you resemble an onion, but you can't question it. Appearance reflects ideals, your father says. Then you're taken to the ancestral altar, made to kneel, and repeat, "I dedicate my life to the clan's honor." You mispronounce honor as sour soup because you're just learning to talk and are made to repeat it 20 times until you get it right. You don't remember much of childhood because it's like a samurai survival manual. No playtime, no sleeping in, no shirtless afternoons running in the yard. Only practicing proper posture, eating on schedule, and learning to not exist as a child but as a representative of honor. You've never known what you like because the moment you could walk, you had to carry burdens. While other kids learn to say mummy, you learn to say, "Father, I accept my fault." And the strangest part, no one finds it strange. To them, you're not a person, you're a project, an ideal to be honed, polished, disciplined, and prepared to one day die nobly. So welcome, Ranmaru. You don't know how to read, love, or laugh too loudly, but you're ready to live your life for honor, and if needed, die for it. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated with the latest stories. You thought your first few years would involve carefree play, falling down, crying when hurt, and being soothed by your mother's lullabies. Wrong. You're a young samurai, and that officially means you're no longer a child. On your 3rd birthday, while other kids get rice cakes, mochi, or swing games on fabric ropes tied to the plum tree in the yard, you're given a wooden sword half the length of your arm and a chair slightly lower than an adult's, because you're old enough to sit with honor. First lesson, stand straight. Not the "yes, I'm here" hand-raised straightness of modern elementary school. Straight like a wooden post. Back taut, neck extended, eyes down at a 45-degree angle, and most importantly, no blinking when your father looks at you. That's how you start your morning. At 3. Afternoon, bowing practice. You're taught to bow by rank 15 degrees for peers, 30 for teachers, 45 for parents, 90 for ancestors. Wrong angle, a strike to the calf. Too low, scolded for flattery. Not deep enough, called arrogant. Correct but too slow, still disrespectful. One day after coughing, you bow too far and cough again. Correct but too slow, still disrespectful. Your grandfather calls it a defamatory bow and makes you bow correctly 200 times to erase the karma. Then comes the classic beginner samurai lesson. No crying, not from pain, hunger or fear. The reason is simple. A true samurai shows no weakness. Crying, emotion, loss of control, dishonoring ancestors. It sounds like philosophy but is enforced with bamboo sticks and razor-sharp glares. From a young age, you're trained to cry silently. When in too much pain, you stare at the sky, clench your teeth and let tears run down your cheeks like a tortured samurai. But you must not whimper. No one teaches you comfort. If you fall, they say, stand. A swordsman doesn't lie down. If a dog bites you, they say, good, get used to battlefield wounds. If you're hungry, they say, this is how the body learns restraint. If you're sad, they say, be glad you didn't die today. Your day begins with the sound of a meditation gong, not for prayer, but to signal posture training. You're required to stay silent during breakfast, not look directly at your father, not eat before your elders, and not ask what the jabber. You accidentally ask what animal is today's meat from. Your father doesn't answer. He just says, an animal that knows how to stay silent better than you. The meal ends with a mouth-wiping ritual, not with a cloth but with your left sleeve, pulled with a wrist twist motion to not waste fabric. At 4, you start moving meditation, walking slowly across the courtyard, eyes down, back straight, hands still, feet not dragging. Simple, but step off a paving stone, or glance at a blooming cherry tree, and someone swings a bamboo stick to remind you. A samurai isn't curious, a samurai focuses. At night, when you want a bedtime story, your mother tells one about warriors who died young to protect their lord. One story describes an 8-year-old who disemboweled himself for breaking his teacher's teapot. At the end, she doesn't say goodnight. She says, may you wake tomorrow and live worthily. You don't understand worthily, but you understand you can't fail. No one praises your pretty drawings. No one laughs at your silly stories. All praise starts with better than last time and ends with but you must try harder. One day you giggle because the neighbor's cat fell off a fence. Your grandfather taps your head with a teacup and says, laughter lowers dignity. Don't become a clown. Slowly you learn to hide emotions like hiding scars. No one teaches you how. They just teach you the price of failing to do so. You start doubting every natural impulse. Hungry, not sure, happy, don't dare, tired, careful, that's seen as weakness. You become a miniature samurai, but lose the concept of I. Instead, you're called heir, successor, guardian of honor. You're not allowed to be a child, only a representative of a future bloodline. One time, sitting alone behind the house, you pick up fallen flower petals on your clothes and blow them away like a game. Your father catches you. He says nothing. He just stares for 5 seconds, then turns away, leaving one sentence, don't let flowers soften your sword. That night, you dream you're a petal. The next morning, you wake earlier than usual, stand straight, bow at the right angle, and say nothing. You stop dreaming. Welcome to a samurai childhood. Here, standing must be firm, bowing must be precise, and crying, never, unless it's inside. But that's weakness too, so best not to have a heart. At 3 years old, while other kids are still drawing in the dirt with sticks, you're handed a bokken, a wooden sword nearly as long as your father's arm. It's not light, not soft, not for play. It's placed in your hands with your grandfather's words. A trembling hand means a trembling heart. A trembling heart isn't worth living, and so the lessons begin. In the morning, before the sun even hits the thatched roof, you stand bare in the courtyard, feet shoulder-width apart, gripping the wooden sword, shivering in the early breeze. But you can't relax, you can't groan, and you absolutely cannot let the sword touch the ground. If it falls, you must kneel and apologize to the sword, as if apologizing to the ancestors' spirits. They say, the sword is your companion, but you know it's your overseer, and you're always the one being watched. The first lesson isn't striking, it's holding. Both hands grip firmly, left hand lower, pinky tightly clutching the handle like it's your lifeline. The second lesson, standing still. You must hold the kamae stance for 30 minutes without wavering. While forest mosquitoes attack, the wind howls, and your grandfather stands behind you, wooden fan in hand, not to cool you but to tap your neck if you shake your head. Once you shifted your right foot half a step because of an ant bite. You were made to swing 300 times into the air until your hands blistered and blood stained the sword's handle. Your father said, pain is a test. If you don't overcome it, you're unworthy of the pain our ancestors endured. The first time you're taught to strike a target, it's a bundle of straw. Straw doesn't fight back, but you tremble. Your arms are too small to swing hard. The cut is crooked. The straw doesn't tear, it just tilts to one side. Your grandfather sighs as if you've insulted the clan. You strike again, On the second try, the straw falls, but it's still not good enough. You strike 42 times before the straw splits cleanly as required, and then you must pick up every scattered straw, because a swordsman must respect the foe he's defeated. No one offers praise. Not when you hold the stance correctly for 60 minutes. Not when you strike as straight as the teacher's sword. Praise is dangerous. Praise softens the spirit. You only get one line. Not bad, but don't get delusional. The next lessons add movement. You're required to move in a spiral through the courtyard, striking while avoiding randomly placed obstacles, bricks, water buckets, dry logs, the neighbor's cat. Once you trip and your sword stabs a tree root, the tip chips. You're made to kneel for 2 hours in the courtyard, holding the sword skyward as an apology to the spirits. That night, you get no rice. They say, you harmed your companion. How can you swallow your conscience? But the sword is wood, and you're a child. No one remembers that. No one wants to. At 4, you're allowed to duel a real person. It's your cousin, 3 years older, twice as strong, and particularly fond of hitting where it hurts. In the first match, you're struck on the shoulder, then the forehead, then the shin. You fall, blood seeping from your hairline. Your father doesn't run to you. He only says, stand. If you can't stand, stay down forever. You stand. You don't know how you stood, only that if you didn't, your honor would lie in that courtyard forever. The next matches aren't better. You lose, but you lose in silence. No groaning, no wincing, no closing your eyes. Once, you cry from the pain, just a few tears. Your mother starts to run to you, but your grandmother holds her back. He needs to learn endurance, she says, or he'll die young. And she's right. You learn not to fight, to endure. Your hands blister, your knees scrape, your cheeks bruise like unripe persimmons, but you still grip the sword every morning, still silently strike the air, still bow to the sword every night. Gradually, your hands stop trembling, not because you're stronger, but because you no longer feel your hands. You learn to move your arms like a machine, only correct technique or not good enough. No tired, no hard, and absolutely no fear. One day, it pours rain, the wind howling through the wall's cracks. You still stand under the eaves, striking to the rhythm of a drum. Each beat is a swing, wrong angle, start over, wrong stance, stand in penalty, close your eyes, disrespectful, catch a cold, deal with it. You learn a truth. It's not just enemies who hurt you. It's your family who forge you to exhaustion, to make you something they believe is worthy of samurai blood. And when you're drained, when you want to drop the sword just once, just to rub your numb arm, your father gently reminds you, if you can't hold a wooden sword, how will you hold responsibility when you're grown? You have no answer. You just grip the sword and keep striking. That's the year you turn 3. And from then on, you never dare let your hands tremble. Because in this world, a trembling hand is the first step to failure. And failure is something a samurai cannot take to the grave. Tomorrow we learn to meditate without feeling your legs exist. Promise it'll be more fun. A little, or not. Every child has a favorite sleep item. A pillow, a stuffed animal, or a warm blanket that smells of their mother. You sleep with a wooden sword. Not because you love it, but because you're forced to bond with the symbol of honor. The bokken, the wooden sword you've dropped, missed, and hit your own face with hundreds of times, is now your bedmate, your dream companion, and if you accidentally knock it off the mat in the wrong position, you must wake in the night, kneel to apologize to the sword, and swing 50 times into the air to atone for unconscious error. Your sleeping room has no mattress, no mosquito net, no window, just an old wooden floor, cold bamboo walls, and the sound of insects meditating all night. You sleep on your side because your spine aches from sword practice. But you can't complain. Complaining is admitting limits, something an honorable samurai never does. Every morning you wake to the sound of a gong, not an alarm clock, but a knock into reality, announcing you must live another day within the rules. Before you can take a sip of water, you must bow to the sword. Then comes morning meditation, sitting motionless, knees on the floor, back straight as a wall, eyes fixed on the actual wall, not closed. You think of nothing, because every thought is a distraction, and distraction is the enemy. After meditation is breakfast. You eat in absolute silence. The meal is cold rice, bland miso soup, and a few slices of pickled radish. No favorite foods, no asking what's for dinner, no I don't like this. If you don't eat, you're not scolded. You're left hungry until dinner. After eating, you must set your bowl down with both hands, bow and say, "I give thanks for nourishing my body," vowing to live worthy of this meal. It sounds philosophical, but when your stomach growls and your knees are numb, it feels like a knife stabbing the truth. Eating isn't for fullness, but to remind you that you're in debt. Lunch and dinner are the same, except you might be tested for composure. Once you sniffled while eating because of a cold. Your father stared for 3 seconds, then said, "A samurai must control bodily fluids." You were banned from soup for 2 days to regain control of your nose. You learned to chew slowly, not for digestion, but to stretch out mealtime. Because beyond eating and training, you have no other activities. You don't play, you don't sing, you don't kick cans, you don't chase dragonflies. Once you looked out at the courtyard, saw commoner kids playing hide and seek, and smiled faintly. Your grandfather caught you. He didn't yell, he just said, "Remember, every minute of laughter is a minute of weakness." And from then, you learned to swallow your smiles. Every night, you must clean your sword before bed, not because it's dirty, but because it represents your soul. Wood is still wood, but you're taught to see it as part of your body. If you neglect it, you're betraying yourself. You sleep on a bamboo mat, head on one arm, the other holding the sword across your chest. Many nights, you wake up cold but don't dare pull an extra blanket, because you're given only one, and you're told scarcity strengthens the body. Once, you dreamed of running away, climbing the wall, racing to the river, and sleeping under the moon. But when you wake, you're back in the dark, beside the wooden sword, and morning meditation has begun. You grow up in numbness, numb souls from meditating, numb back from the hard mat, numb wrists from swinging, and a numb mind from not being allowed to ask, speak, or err. Everything you do is watched. How you hold a bowl, fold clothes, greet adults, bow before the altar. Every movement is part of an endless test, and the only reward is living on with greater responsibility than yesterday. No one asks if you're tired. No one asks if you're happy. No one asks if you want to be a samurai. They just say, "You were born into this bloodline. Honor isn't a choice. It's to live and die with." And so you live. No complaints. No questions. No rest. You eat rice in silence. Sleep with your sword, and grow like a tree pruned of branches, to be straighter, more proper, more honorable, but also less shaded. Tomorrow we talk about learning to write. If you think writing kanji is hard, wait until you write while kneeling, to learn the art of combining pain and scholarship. You're introduced to Bushido on a foggy morning, just after learning the Japanese-Chinese alphabet, and still mixing up the characters for loyalty and death. Your father doesn't wait for you to read books. He places an old parchment scroll on the table, taps it lightly, and says, "This is the way. You don't need to understand. Just live it." And so begins your journey with Bushido, not through explanations or stories, but through observation, endurance, and punishment. The 7 core virtues of Bushido are etched into your mind, not with ink, but with retin whips, the smell of antiseptic, and tears you dare not shed. Loyalty, courage, compassion, courtesy, integrity, honor, self-control. They sound beautiful, but each comes with a price, and you pay with your childhood. The first lesson is loyalty. What does it mean? When your Lord orders you to stand in the rain for 3 hours, you don't move, not because the Lord is right, but because the Lord has authority in your house. Your father is the Lord. When he makes you kneel on sharp gravel all afternoon for looking outside during meditation, you can't resent him. Loyalty is not questioning, your father says, because if you question, you'll betray later. The second lesson is courage, not fighting or shouting boldly. It's not fearing pain, not fearing death, and not fearing a life bound to duty. You learn courage by standing still while the teacher strikes your thighs with a stick to test your reflexes. Hard hits, sudden hits, unannounced hits. If you dodge, failure. If you cry out, shame. If you wince, unworthy of a samurai. Only when you stand like a statue, eyes forward, does the teacher nod slightly, passable. The lesson on compassion comes in a strange form. You're tasked with killing a chicken to make porridge for your grandfather. You hesitate. The chicken looks at you. You look at the knife. The knife looks at you. You let go. Your father steps forward silently, swings his sword once, then turns to you. You're not compassionate. You're weak. You're punished with 2 missed meals to learn the difference between pity and mercy. That night, you can't sleep, not from hunger, but from wondering why, to be good, you must learn to kill without flinching. Courtesy is the easiest lesson, also the most persistent, from how you knock on a door, pour tea, place chopsticks, to how you bow entering a room. Every action has rules. Mistakes are corrected, repeated mistakes are beaten. Once, you accidentally step over the teacher's sword without bowing. You're called before the class, made to bow to the sword 100 times, then kneel and copy by hand. Courtesy is the survival of the soul, until sunset. Your hand swells, your eyes tire, but you can't wince. Integrity is the part you can't grasp, because you're never allowed to speak your true feelings. Once you said, "I don't want to do this," when ordered to climb the roof to retrieve a fallen flag. Your grandfather looks at you, says nothing, goes inside, returns with a bokken twice your size, and says, "Integrity isn't saying what you want, it's doing what you must." You climb the roof, the wind is strong, your hands scrape, you think you'll fall, but you don't dare stop. You only think falling might feel better than facing that disappointed gaze. The lesson of honor is the longest. It's every day, every action, every breath. So you're reminded, honor is the only asset no one can steal, but you can lose it yourself. When you drop a rice bowl, you must slap your own face 3 times. When misunderstood, you can't argue. Explaining lacks spirit. When insulted, you can't retaliate, but must remember, wait for the right moment, and respond with a symbolic act. Once, an older student pours water on your head. You say nothing. That night, you quietly place his sandals neatly before the dojo door, with a note, "I thank you for teaching me patience, but tomorrow I request a proper fight at the right time, place, and manner." The next morning, both of you are punished with kneeling, but your teacher's eyes seem satisfied. Self-control is the final virtue, and the conclusion of the entire process of reshaping the person. No outbursts, no impulsiveness, no overeating, overspeaking, overlaughing, overthinking. Everything must be controlled. You're made to sit beside a plate of pickled plums without touching it for 30 minutes, to practice restraint. You're made to meditate in the midday summer heat without blinking, to control your heartbeat. You're made to recount a sad story without changing expression, to prove you've mastered emotions. At year's end, you're tested. Those who pass all 7 trials receive a hand-carved scroll with the words, "The way lies in action, not in words." You receive it, but your hands feel nothing. Your eyes no longer shine. Your heart no longer stirs. You've learned Bushido, not from books, but from whips, from cold, from hunger, from swallowed tears. And now, you can look in the mirror and see a small person standing straight, unshaken, silent, unyielding. Tomorrow, you'll learn to meditate. This time, on snow. No joke. You begin learning meditation on an early winter morning, when fog blankets the courtyard and cold wind slaps your face like the ancestors' hands testing your alertness. You don't know what meditation is. You only know that, instead of sword practice, your father calls you to the porch, points to a flattened straw cushion, and says, "Sit, don't move." And so you sit. At first you think it'll be easy. Just close your eyes, breathe lightly, like the old men in stories. But no, you can't close your eyes. You must keep them open, staring at a blank wall a meter away. Oh. The posture is full lotus, legs crossed, heels on thighs, back straight, hands resting in a crescent shape, thumbs lightly touching, no leaning, no heavy breathing, and absolutely no speaking. You sit for the first 15 minutes, and the first thing you learn is pain. Pain in your knees, pain in your back, pain in parts you never noticed. Hips, neck, nape, shoulders, ankles, all screaming in silence. But you can't react, because behind you is the meditation teacher, a gaunt old man like dry kindling, but with the speed of lightning when swinging his bamboo stick. He holds a kyosaku, a long wooden stick for correcting the spirit, and circles the students. Slumped back, a tap. Drooping shoulders, a tap. Yawning, a harder tap. Sighing, 2 taps. Moving, an unannounced tap. You try to stay still, but your eyes blur from the cold wind, your nose starts to run, and your legs go numb. Not lightly numb, numb to the point you don't know if they exist, but you must keep sitting. You don't dare move. In your head you think, it's just meditation, it won't kill you. But after 40 minutes, you start to doubt that. It feels like waiting for death, without knowing when it's your turn. Meditation, They say it's for finding peace. But for you, it's a war with no clear enemy. It's fighting your legs that want to break, ignoring your back that feels like it's splitting, ignoring your brain screaming, stand up, but you must answer with silence. Some days, it snows, not the pretty snow of ink paintings, snow as cold as a blade, cutting your skin as you meditate on the porch. Your thin robe blocks no wind. You shiver, but you don't dare shiver hard, because if your shoulders twitch, the Kyosaku visits and taps with a reminder. If the body hurts, let it hurt. The mind must not waver. You hear that phrase hundreds of times, until you can't tell physical pain from mental pain anymore. They blend into a terrifying silence. The only time you're allowed to move is to bow at the start and end of the session. But the bow must match the rhythm, the angle, bow wrong, and you meditate again from the start. And from the start means an extra 30 minutes of sitting. Once you sat so long that when you stood, your legs didn't obey. You fell face first onto the floor. No one laughed. They just turned away. Because your mind wasn't still. You crawled to the corner, ashamed and in pain. But the next day, you meditated again. Because it's the schedule. That's because you have no right to refuse. Because you're taught. Meditation isn't for comfort. It's for learning to endure. Once a week, the teacher asks a student, "What do you see in the silence?" One says, "I hear the wind." Another says, "I see myself." When it's your turn, you want to say, "I see a slow death," but you don't dare.
Yeesh.
You say, "I see emptiness." The teacher nods, neither praising nor criticizing. But that night, you're assigned to clean the entire meditation hall, because emptiness is a sign of insufficient devotion. You don't understand, but you clean. In your head, you repeat the question, why does stillness drive you mad? Meditation continues throughout your childhood, at least 30 minutes daily. On special days, like ancestor ceremonies, you meditate for 3 hours, broken by 10-minute breaks each hour. You learn to sleep during meditation, not from laziness, but because it's the only way your body doesn't go insane from pain. A kind of open-eyed sleep, sleepwalking, in wakefulness. At some point, you feel you're no longer yourself, just an entity, sitting in the right place, at the right time, in the right posture. You don't know what you're learning. But you know if you don't sit, you'll be punished. And if you sit wrong, you'll be punished too. So you choose the path with the least stick. You learn to let go of thoughts, not in an enlightened way, but because your brain is too tired to think. And strangely, they call that progress. One day, the teacher says, "You're starting to understand meditation. You no longer react to pain." You smile faintly, but inside you know you don't understand anything. You're just numb. Tomorrow, we'll ride horses. Sounds grand, but if you've ever fallen off a horse into a cow dung puddle, you'll know the ground isn't as kind as people think. You're taught to ride a horse when you turn 5.5. No birthday cake, no well wishes. Just a horse 3 times your size, named Kuro, meaning black, and a rough rein like a rope for tying prisoners. He who conquers a horse conquers his heart, your teacher says, then hoists you onto the saddle. No stirrups for support, no one to hold you, no helmet, just you, the horse, and a patch of ground as hard as a battlefield drum. The saddle is traditional hardwood, unpadded. It stings from your backside to your tailbone. Your hands grip the reins without knowing how to pull them right. The horse doesn't need a reason to be uncooperative. Kuro rolls its eyes, tosses its head, then bolts forward as if its tail was set on fire. You don't know what to do, so you scream, the first scream you've dared let out in 3 years of samurai silence. But no one saves you. Your father stands outside, arms crossed, saying softly, "Don't let it drag you. Be the master." But you're dragged, literally and figuratively. The horse charges through the courtyard, past the woodpile, then veers sharply left. You don't turn in time. You fly off the saddle like a screaming sack of rice, landing on your knees, then sliding 3 meters like a stone flung by fate's contempt. No one rushes to help you. They just say, "Everyone falls the first time. Get up." You get up, knees bleeding, eyes wet, but you clench your teeth, turn back to Kuro, the beast that just slapped you with its weight and attitude. The lesson continues. This time, you're tied to the reins with a cloth through your waistband to increase bonding, meaning if you fall, You won't hit the ground. You'll be dragged. You'll be dragged, and you are. The second fall comes when you pull the rein left instead of right. Kuro doesn't like wrong orders. It stops abruptly, flinging you forward, then walks on as if nothing happened. You're dragged a few meters, face scraping the ground, mouth full of dirt, legs tangled under the horse's belly, like nature's cruel prank. They say you're bonding your body with the beast's strength. You think you're bonding your organs with the planet's surface. After 3 lessons, you learn riding a horse isn't the glamorous adventure depicted in scrolls. It's the art of enduring pain, keeping balance, and reading the mind of an animal more emotionally complex than you expected. Kuro doesn't like you. You know because it always kicks the dirt after you mount, as if cursing with its hooves, but you can't choose another horse. A samurai doesn't switch horses for being difficult, your father says. Only a horse switches samurai if the rider is unworthy. You hate that saying, but you don't dare say it, because, well, you are unworthy. Each session, you try harder, keep your back straight, feet firm in the saddle, eyes forward. You learn to pull the reins in rhythm, tap the horse's flanks to steer, breathe evenly to avoid startling it. But every time you think you're close to success, Kuro either gallops wildly or stops dead, sending you flying and crashing like a mishandled sack of rice. One day, it rains. You still train. The muddy ground turns the courtyard into a death slide. Kuro loves splashing water. It runs in circles as if taunting you, while you cling to the saddle, feeling like you're riding a stomping nightmare. That time you fall backward, foot caught in the rain. You're dragged through mud, water, and a pile of cow dung left from the day before. When they untie you, you can't tell what's mud and what's you. Your father looks at you, silent, then turns away. He doesn't scold, but you know that look. Disappointment. Not because you're weak, but because you're not tough enough. You learn that riding is a lesson about yourself, about controlling fear, balancing your body, listening to wordless signals. A head toss, a snort, a stretch from Kuro, all messages. If you misread them, you pay with a sore back and dragged honor. After 3 months, you manage a few laps without falling. No one claps, no one praises, but Kuro stops kicking. It only snorts softly when you touch its mane. You think it's a sign. You don't know if it's acceptance or just exhaustion, but you choose to believe it's acceptance, because after all those falls, drags, bruises and scrapes, you need something to believe in. Tomorrow, we return to the wooden sword, not to ride, but to get pummeled by bigger kids. From here, every game takes the shape of a battle, and you have no choice but to step in. 7 years old for many kids. It's the age to start learning letters, drawing flowers, building blocks, and imagining themselves as ninjas saving princesses. For you, 7 is when you're told, too late to be soft. It's not said with reproach. It's said like a verdict, a conclusion decided long ago, just waiting to be announced. On your 7th birthday morning, there's no cake, no gifts, no wishes, just a small ceremony where your father unrolls a scroll, spreads it on the table, and writes your name in black ink on white paper, in flowing kanji you can't yet read. From now on, your mistakes won't be called innocent, he says. They're failures. And so you're officially a young samurai whose childhood warranty has expired. You start the day by folding your bedding, not just folding to be neat. It must be folded in the right direction, with the right number of creases, the blanket's edge parallel to the mat's border within half a finger's width of error. Fold wrong. Do it again. Fold wrong 3 times. No breakfast. Then you go to the courtyard, practice 300 sword swings, and move to studying letters. An ancient kanji chart hangs before you like an impenetrable fortress wall. The black, tangled characters look like spiderwebs. You ask the teacher, "What does this character mean?" He doesn't answer. He just says, "Write it first, understand later." So you write. Each character 30 times. Write wrong. Erase with sandpaper. Yes, sandpaper. No erasers. Because mistakes must leave a trace. Your hand blisters, but you can't stop. The lesson isn't in the writing, it's in the will. In continuing even when you don't know what you're doing. Lunch arrives. Rice still cold. Miso still bland. Pickled radish still salty, as wordless sorrow. But you can't complain. Complaining shows emotion. And emotion, as everyone keeps repeating, it's what you must eliminate. In the afternoon, you practice meditation. Not just 30 minutes this time, 45. During that time, you must keep your head still, back straight, soul anchored. You're tapped on the shoulder twice for blinking too much. Eyes are the window to the mind, the teacher says. Moving eyes, troubled mind. You want to argue that your eyes are just reacting to dust, but you don't dare. Arguing borders on disrespect. Disrespect borders on shame, and shame has only one redemption: double effort. So you close your eyes, by keeping them open and not seeing. In the late afternoon, you learn the tea ceremony. Not to enjoy tea, but to practice patience and control. You learn to pour water, turn the cup, lift the kettle's lid, bow at the right angle when offering tea to your elders. You've never drunk tea before. Its bitterness makes you cough lightly. A mistake. The teacher looks at you, not steady enough to accept bitterness, he says. So you're made to stand outside, holding the bitter tea for an hour. No drinking, no spilling, no shaking hands. You learn a costly lesson. Bitterness isn't just a taste, it's a state of living. Every week, your progress is tested, not with grades, with eyes. Your father circles the courtyard, watching you stand, sit, swing, write, saying nothing. If he's silent, you pass. If he sighs, you redo everything from the start. One day he says only, 7 years old, no longer a child. You hear it and wonder if children can cry, make mistakes, dream. When did you leave that land? You don't remember the last time you laughed freely. Don't remember the last time you ran for joy instead of orders. Don't remember the smell of spring plum blossoms. You only remember the cool floor in the early morning, the sound of swords clashing, the numbness in your souls after each meditation session. You start to feel like a woodblock carving, whittled daily, sanded of emotions, sanded of thoughts, leaving only a proper shape. At month's end, you write your first philosophy with a brush. Life has no room for weakness. Only then is the way complete. You don't fully understand, but you write 30 times. Each shaky stroke means starting over. 7 years old. You're no longer allowed to be soft, no longer allowed to ask why, no longer allowed to hope for anything else. You're not a child. You're a draft of honor, and every day you must live to be worthy of that name. Next, we return to the wooden sword, but this time, not to swing at the air, to face real people. And no one goes easy on a 7-year-old. You're trained in martial arts every day, from before the sun rises until your face is as red as the evening sky from exhaustion. But what you practice most, repeat most, and are tested most harshly on, isn't the sword's path, the horse's stance, or the way to strike with a straight back. It's restraint. Restraint, in the world of a young samurai, isn't the moral or heroic act the masters praise. Restraint is survival, the number one survival skill. You first learn to endure hunger, not from scarcity, but from punishment. One day, you spill your rice bowl because your hands tremble after endless sword swings. Your mother starts to scoop another serving, but your father waves her off. No need, let him learn to value each grain. You sit watching the family eat in silence, your stomach growling, the faint smell of miso, as tempting as a feast. But you're only allowed to look, no drooling, no complaining, no slumping over the table from exhaustion, because that shows weakness. After 3 such punishments, you learn to eat slowly, cleanly, in rhythm, not letting a single grain fall. Enduring thirst comes next. During midday summer sword practice, your throat is dry as sand, your eyes dazzled by the sun. You lick your lips and reach for the water gourd, but your teacher swats it away. You're still breathing, so you're not dead. Not dead means you don't need to drink. You swallow spit, but there's nothing left to swallow, only the bitter heat in your throat. That night, you gulp 3 bowls of water. The next morning, your stomach aches. No one asks why. They just say, a weak stomach comes from a weak heart, and you learn to sip water in 3 small swallows. Enduring pain is a constant lesson. Every bruise, scratch, and swelling is a training certificate. Once, during meditation, you're struck across the back with a bamboo stick for slouching. You grit your teeth, but that night, when changing, your mother sees the red-purple welt stretching across your back. She silently applies salve, saying nothing, her eyes a mix of pity and powerlessness you can't decipher. You learn to never say it hurts, only, I'll be more careful. enduring cold, winter, when snow falls through the thatched roof and your straw mat is still damp from last week's rain. You curl up, hands clutching your sword, teeth chattering, but you don't dare pull the blanket above your chest, because a samurai must sleep ready for action. The cold numbs your ears, freezes your feet, but you still wake on time, bow at the right angle, and step into the courtyard to the gong's call for meditation. Enduring heat, wearing a thick kimono for sword practice under the summer sun, sweat soaking through 4 layers, dripping onto the wooden floor, hands slick, feet slipping, eyes blurred from sweat, stinging them. You can't wipe it, can't stop, must keep swinging 100 times before you can bow to end the session. Enduring fatigue, after a full day of training, with swollen knees, aching wrists, and numb shoulders, you still face evening meditation. You sit, heart pounding like a drum, back about to break, but you can't breathe heavily, lean back, or collapse. A tired body is a body learning, your teacher says. Only the lazy feel the need to rest. You don't argue. You sit still, like a statue learning to be unmoved by the wind, enduring silence when you have something to say, a joy to share, but you know it'll be seen as overly excitable. One day, you draw a cat with a brush and show it to your training partner, both giggling, until the teacher walks in. No one yells. He just tears the drawing in half and says, "The drawing isn't wrong, but joy at the wrong time is." From then on, you draw in your mind, no paper, no brush, just imagine, then erase, enduring tears, the final, hardest lesson. Not because you're weak, but because everything hits at once: pain, hunger, fatigue, cold, shame, loneliness. One night, lying awake, ears hearing the wind howl through the wall's cracks, you want to cry, not loudly, just quietly, but you don't dare. You turn to the wall, bite your lip, and tell yourself, this is a test too. And then tears fall, not from pain, but because you know you're not allowed to cry. The next morning, your eyes are slightly swollen. Your mother sees. She only whispers, "The wind was strong last night." You nod. No one mentions it. Again, you keep enduring emotions, enduring desires, enduring everything that makes you feel human, because that's the only way of life recognized in the world you exist in. No one praises you, no one encourages you, but enduring is the one thing you do well that no one objects to. Next, you'll face the Genpuku ceremony, officially becoming an adult, though you still don't know if you're a child or just a shadow forged into shape without anyone asking what's inside. You step into 12 years old, like someone entering a crossroads where all paths lead to duty. It's not an age for dreaming or rebelling. It's the age for the Genpuku ceremony, the ritual marking you as an adult in the clan's eyes, though inside, you still don't know how to live true to yourself. The ceremony happens at dawn, when dew still clings to the tiled roof, and you haven't yet digested last night's morality lesson. They shave your hair, discarding the child's top knot, replacing it with a warrior's style, a bare crown reminding you there's no shelter for what's called innocence. You're dressed in your first hakama, longer, heavier, sharper than any clothes you've worn. Your mother ties your sash, her hands trembling slightly, but her eyes dare not shed a tear. Crying on Genpuku Day is a bad omen, and you don't know what to feel: pride, fear, or just emptiness. You kneel before the clan altar, where an ancestor's portrait, sword in hand, gazes down as if judging. Your father approaches with a real sword, a wakizashi, and hands it to you, not to wield, but to receive. You must bow, raise your hands to accept the sword, like accepting fate from another's hands. When you touch the hilt, the adults bow to you, for the first time, not out of respect for you, but because from now on, if you fail, you bear the consequences alone. Your father announces your adult name, different from your childhood one. From Ranmaru, you become Yoshitada. The new name means keeper of the way. You didn't choose it, you just learn to nod when it's given. The ceremony ends with you drinking a sip of sake, your first burning your throat, but you can't cough. They say, the burn cleanses childhood. You don't know if it's cleansed, you only know it sears your throat like something you weren't ready to swallow. From that day, how people address you changes. Children call you Sama. Adults see you as an incomplete youth, no longer forgiven for your age. You're no longer allowed to play. You never were. Now, even the excuse of being young is gone. You can't sigh, can't misspeak, can't move without dignity. Your words can now be remembered, your actions are now a model for younger ones, and your mistakes now carry the cost of dishonor. You start attending small household councils, not to speak, but to learn to listen, nod at the right time, and remember what isn't written. You're taught to manage money, not to spend, but to calculate taxes, divide shares, or prepare for battle. You're taught to spot liars, though you haven't dared be honest with yourself. You're given your first small task, delivering a letter to the local lord, a simple act, but you must learn to kneel properly when presenting it. Avoid direct eye contact with superiors. Know when to step back 3 paces, when to stay silent, and how to answer passers-by politely without revealing anything. It's not a task, it's a test. And you live each day like every hour is an exam. At night, you still sleep with a sword, but now it's real. The wakizashi from the genpuku lies by your pillow, cold and silent, like a friend who knows, if you err gravely enough, it's the only path to cleanse your fault. You no longer dream of playing. You dream of being judged before the ancestral altar. You can't speak, but every gaze understands. He wasn't worthy. You wake with a start, hand still gripping the hilt, cold sweat on your neck. You want to scream, but you only dare breathe softly. The genpuku doesn't make you an adult, it just makes you someone who no longer has the right to be a child. You're forced to grow, not through natural maturity, but through generations of expectations piling onto your shoulders like stones on a thatched roof. You don't dare bow too low for fear of breaking, but you don't dare stand too tall for fear of arrogance. You float in a state belonging nowhere, not yet an adult, no longer a child. You're a half-formed samurai, not strong enough to protect anyone, but dangerous enough to be held accountable if you fail to protect. From here, you face the real world, not through books, but through blood, sweat, and gazes that no longer show mercy. Tomorrow, we go to the execution ground, not to learn theory, but to see heads fall with your own eyes. Are you ready? It doesn't matter, because you've already been deemed ready. You start noticing someone just after turning 13, and it's immediately deemed a grave deviation from the path of honor. She's the daughter of the village blacksmith, always bringing charcoal to your family, walking beside her father, head bowed low, never speaking more than 3 words. But one day, you see her smile faintly as she watches a cat chase falling leaves in the courtyard, and that smile ripples through you like a morning breeze, disturbing a still lake. You don't know her name. You don't dare ask. You only know that when she comes, your heart beats faster. You try to stand rigid, eyes forward, lips pressed tight, but your mind swirls with questions you can't voice. What does she think? Does she notice me? Does she know she's made you want to write a poem you're never allowed to write? But feelings, in the world you live in, have no place. Personal emotions are the root of chaos. Your teacher once said, when you followed a butterfly with your eyes during meditation, love, or any form of stirring, is seen as distraction, weakness, a step off the Bushido path. A samurai's heart must not waver, must not dream, and must never let the heart outpace the sword. You think you can hide it, but once ignited, feelings seep into every action. One day, when she delivers charcoal, you bow half a beat too slowly. Your mother notices. She says nothing, but that night, your father calls you to the courtyard. He doesn't yell, he just asks, what will guide you, reason or emotion? You stay silent, not because you don't know how to answer, but because you know any answer will be wrong. After that, your meditation hours are doubled for a week. No one states the reason, but everyone knows. You learn that, in the so-called warrior spirit, the heart must be trained before the limbs. Emotions must be locked away like a sword in its scabbard, not shown, not touched, and if accidentally revealed, quickly sheathed before anyone sees. You start avoiding her gaze. When she passes by, you turn away, pretending to ponder something vital, like strategies for repelling imaginary enemies, or techniques for polishing a sword in a snowstorm. But in avoiding her, you see her more clearly. The less you dare look, the more you remember details. A small burn on her hand, her hair always tied with a blue cloth, her shoes slightly worn at the left heel. These trivial things invade your mind, overtaking spaces meant for teachings on honor and horizontal cuts. One night, you dream she speaks to you. Just speaks, nothing more. Her voice soft as a breeze. But when you wake, your heart races, and your hand grips the sword so tightly your knuckles whiten. You're afraid, not of being caught, but of yourself, of failing to restrain. If this continues, you ask your teacher for extra sword practice. You add meditation sessions. You copy Bushido in tiny script until your hand aches, all to drown out something you were never taught to face. Feelings. You were never told emotions are natural, only that anything making you feel weak is an enemy. Each time your heart aches, you tell yourself, it's not real, it's a test. But not every test can be sliced away. Then one day, she stops coming. The blacksmith says his daughter was married off to another province, as arranged. No one in your household reacts. It's irrelevant to the clan, but you stand frozen. No words, no breath, nothing. You climb to the rooftop, look down the path where she used to walk, see it empty, and tell yourself, good, no more weakness. But that night, you don't sleep. For a week, during meditation, you can't focus. Every time you close your eyes, you see hers. Not smiling, just looking. One night, you sit before your sword, hand on the hilt, and whisper, I'm sorry, I let my heart waver. No one hears, but you know you've confessed the ultimate taboo, and in your world, admitting weakness is like admitting betrayal. The next morning, you meditate longer, swing harder, bow deeper, and never speak of it again. You think, maybe it'll fade, maybe you'll forget, but a part of you knows emotions don't die, they're just stored away, like an unsent letter, sealed in a drawer, locked by honor. Tomorrow, you'll enter the dojo officially. There, no one cares if you've loved, longed, or dreamed. They only care if your cut is straight enough, and if blood falls according to ritual. You step into the official dojo for the first time on a frigid February morning, when the frost hasn't yet lifted, and your breath is visible, a sign you're still alive. Though inside, you're trembling not just from the cold. The gate isn't large, but it's heavy. Thick wood, carved with kanji. You take minutes to decipher. Body unbroken, heart unyielding, blood unspent, the way incomplete. Not a greeting, a warning. As you cross the threshold, a low voice stops you. It's a trainer, hair neatly tied, face expressionless, holding a bamboo stick half again, your height. He doesn't ask your name. He just nods for you to remove your shoes, bow, step in, and leave behind everything you knew. Inside, there's no chatter, no friendly greetings, only the sound of footsteps steady as war drums, and wooden swords clashing in a rhythmic symphony of pain. You're given a beginner's wooden armor, slightly too big, musty, with cords stiff as rope. You don't dare ask how to wear it. You fumble until you tie the left side to the right, and an older student slaps your neck, not with his hand, but with the flat of a wooden sword, saying, tying it wrong disrespects the dojo. Before you can bow in apology, you're pulled to the center of the courtyard. Test fight, the trainer says. Everyone new tastes the strike before learning. You think you'll face someone your level. Wrong. You're paired with a second-year student, half a head taller, looking at you like you're an unsatisfying breakfast. The dojo falls silent. You take your stance, sword raised, hands slightly trembling. He doesn't. He steps forward, twists his wrist, and in a flash, you only see the wooden sword whip past before your whole body tilts like a banana tree in a storm. You fall, not flung far. You spin, then crash onto your back. The pain steals your breath, but you scramble up, knowing lingering costs you respect. The second time, you stance more carefully, but this time, he doesn't strike your body. He parries your sword. Your hands go numb, like they're pricked with needles. You loosen your grip for half a second, enough to be knocked down again. This time, your shoulder hits. Your vision darkens, but you stand. The third time, you don't think of winning. Just don't lose too badly. You shout a short, hoarse cry and charge. Your sword grazes his shoulder as his slams down on your head. Both stop. The trainer nods, doesn't say who won, just enough. Back in line, you limp back, blood trickling from your forehead, soaking through your headband. Sweat mixes with blood, tasting salty, but something inside you stirs, not pride, awakening. You realize, here, you're not special. No one knows who you are. No one cares how long you've trained, whose son you are, how many times you've fallen. Here, you're a number, a body to forge, a lump of clay to mold, and the weak are molded with more pain. The next day, you're grouped, 8 per group, 1 leader. Your leader is a girl. Yes, a girl named Fumiko, your age, but training since 6. Quick hands, cold eyes, and never smiles. Here, there's no boy or girl, she says. Only those who hold their sword and those who drop it. You don't dare drop, but you do. Every new technique, horizontal cut, straight block, wrist turn, you're half a beat slower, and that half beat means a strike to your thigh, shoulder, wrist. Once, you slip, and your sword flies from your hand. No one speaks. Fumiko picks it up, hands it back, and whispers, "Next time, lose your sword, lose your face." You bow, take it, hands shaking, heart stinging. That afternoon, you practice dodging. Stand still, let others swing at you. You can't dodge early, can't blink, only dodge the instant the sword grazes past. You're hit 3 times. Each hit means 10 push-ups on the hard wooden floor, under gazes, not of reproach, but worse, indifference. That night, you return home, armor torn, hands swollen, back aching, but your father asks nothing. He just looks at you, nods slightly. Good. Falling and standing again is good, but you don't feel good. You feel melting. The old you, confident, settled, obedient, is being washed away. What's forming is a new version, sharper, quieter, harder. On your first dojo day, you barely breathed before being knocked down, but from that day, you learn to breathe slower. Breathe like someone who knows each breath, prepares you for the next blow. Tomorrow, you'll face a real fear, being called a kid, and you'll do everything to erase those 2 words from the eyes of those who don't believe you're grown enough to take pain without crying. You once thought bowing was just a polite, simple gesture. Anyone could do it, just bend at the waist, and that's it. But then you entered the dojo and realized bowing is an art, a rule, a political ritual, a line between honor and blasphemy. And if you bow wrong, just by 15 degrees, you're not just wrong, you're seen as a traitor. No joke. Bowing isn't about showing personal courtesy, it's about proving you still hold your place in the order of honor. Bowing wrong means you don't understand hierarchy, and not understanding hierarchy means you could cause chaos. And chaos, in the samurai world, is no different from treason. You were taught how to bow according to rank, 15 degrees for peers, 30 for teachers, 45 for fathers, 60 for lords, and 90 for ancestors. But the angle isn't just math, it's feeling, it's expression. It's how you place your hands, tilt your back, keep your neck straight, lower your eyes just enough, and don't breathe heavily while bowing. Once, you bowed to your teacher at about 20 degrees instead of 30, because your back hurt from getting hit with a sword the day before. The teacher said nothing then, but at afternoon meditation, you were called to the center of the courtyard, asked to bow again in front of the whole group. You did it right. The teacher nodded, then said, "Good, but this morning, you bowed too shallow. You haven't betrayed yet. But you've made the ancestors worry. You were punished to kneel for an hour before the dojo's altar. No crying, no moving, no complaining. So, you bowed your head for real this time. 90 degrees truly, to think about what you still didn't understand. After that, you started practicing the bowing ritual like a formal kata. Every morning, you had to bow to the dojo, the teacher, the peers. Each time, you had to hit the right rhythm, the right angle. Each time, you were judged by eyes, not ordinary eyes, but those trained over decades, able to spot a 5-degree error from 2 meters away. One day, you saw a new student bow to the teacher at 25 degrees instead of 30, eyes looking up before the teacher walked away. Immediately, the group leader stepped forward, wordlessly slammed a bokken on the ground in front of him, and said, "You think you're above the one who taught you." No one intervened, no one defended, because rules don't need explaining, rules just need following. You learned that bowing isn't about lowering yourself, it's about keeping your head from falling. Each correct bow makes you feel you've kept a piece of honor intact. Each wrong bow, even for a moment, sends a chill down your spine, like someone staring through you. When you bow to the ancestors in the monthly ceremony, you must hold the pose for 3 breaths. No trembling, no lifting eyes, no shrugging shoulders, because in that moment, you're not just you, you're the representative of all those who've passed. Bowing right is respect. Bowing wrong is defamation. You once saw someone expelled from the dojo, not for sneaking an attack, not for losing a match, but for bowing to the master, with one nod too few. He forgot to return his left hand to the right position before bending. A small mistake, but enough for the council to see he lacked roots, and so he was asked to leave the gate, never to return, his honor stripped from his name, his record erased from the wall of fame. You understood that in this world, there's no such thing as a small mistake. Your bow is a message, a declaration, a silent oath repeated daily. Each correct bow is a moment you earn the right to exist. Each wrong bow is a step closer to the abyss of unworthiness. One day, you performed the ritual with 20 others. You were so nervous your heart pounded, your feet sweated, but you kept your eyes in place, spine like a bowstring, neck rigid as bamboo. You bowed, exactly 30 degrees. Perfect, the teacher nodded. No praise, but you knew, that day, you survived. That night, you sat, mentally writing a diary, because no one's allowed to write for real, and the first line was today, I bowed deep enough to keep myself. Next, you'll witness something no one warns you about, a real execution, not practice, not straw, flesh, bone, blood, and you must stand there, unblinking, not bowing, because honor never shrinks back when the blade comes forward. The first real execution practice came without announcement, without ceremony, without a schedule posted at the dojo gate. You were just called to the courtyard early one morning, with 4 other students, standing in line silently, while the mist still hung low, as if nature wanted to shield your eyes from what was coming. The instructor didn't hold a wooden sword. He held a real katana. Its steel blade gleamed, so cold it seemed it could silence anyone without even cutting. Today, you'll learn the first lesson about consequences, he said. No one asked, consequences of what? Because here, everything needs no explanation. A bound man was brought to the courtyard, a criminal, according to a whisper from the person next to you, stole from the Lord, resisted, got caught. The law had judged him, but the punishment was used as a lesson for future samurai. Like you, his neck was placed on a low wooden block, back bare, hair disheveled. He didn't look up. You didn't dare look long, but you glanced, for a moment, and saw his eyes closed, calm, almost resigned. Lord, you were handed a real sword. For the first time, your hand felt heavy, not because the sword was heavy, but because what you held now wasn't a training tool. It was the power to end a life. Toe wants to strike first, the instructor asked. Silence. You didn't raise your hand, but you didn't step back either, and that was enough for him to point at you. You stepped forward. You walked out, each step echoing on the wooden floor, soft but sounding like war drums in your heart. No, you stood behind the bound man. He still didn't turn. You stood there, hand trembling slightly. The instructor approached, placed a hand on your shoulder, and said softly, so only you could hear, if you don't strike cleanly, you'll suffer. If you strike off target, you'll be shamed. So strike true, because you're no longer a child. You didn't reply, just nodded. You raised the sword, 2 hands, back straight, mind cold, heart hot. Then you struck, 1 swing, strong, fast, cleaner than any practice you'd ever done. The blade cut through neck and wood like slicing through thick air, a low, heavy, wet sound, and then blood, not book blood, not the red ink of a teacher's mark, real blood, warm, salty, spraying in threads, then falling in drops. 1 drop hit your cheek, cold at first, then warming. You didn't blink, didn't step back, but your heart tightened, not from fear, but from the strange feeling. You just did something you can't undo. You'd never killed before, but now you had, not in battle, in a lesson. You stepped back, bowed, returned the sword. The instructor nodded slightly. Enough force, he said, then pointed to the next person. You stood aside, feeling the blood dry on your cheek. You didn't wipe it, didn't dare. Wiping would admit you felt something, and feeling, in this moment, was taboo. After 5 people, 5 heads fell, 5 swords blooded, 5 empty gazes. No one spoke, no one cried, no one ate breakfast. You were asked to write a reflection journal, but not with emotions, only observations. Hand firm grip, strike angle, 45 degrees, force sufficient, blood, sprayed left. That was your first line. The last was lesson. In the sword, there is the way. In blood, there is the law. That night you lay down, hands still remembering the feel of the real sword's hilt. You dreamed. No nightmares, just blood flowing like red paint on an ink drawing. No screams, just the sound of the wooden floor echoing your steps. The next morning, you woke, washed your face thoroughly, but your left cheek still felt red, not from blood, but because you lightly slapped your own face before stepping into the courtyard. A reminder, this isn't a dream, and you're no longer just someone learning to strike. You're now someone who has struck. Tomorrow, you'll face the greatest shame in a samurai's life, being called a child in front of the entire dojo, and you'll do what every hurt child does. Fight back, not for glory, but because you can't stand the scornful look from the one who bowed to you yesterday. The first time you messed up an important ritual was during the 3rd month sword inspection ceremony at the dojo, a formal evaluation before all the instructors, fellow students, and clan representatives. You were required to perform the sword salute and a sequence of combat simulation movements. Everything went smoothly until the 7th step. You turned your body half a beat too slow, a half-beat delay. No one heard it, no one called it out, but the dojo suddenly fell silent, as if someone had just shattered a sacred statue. You bowed deeper than necessary to hide the tremor rising within you, then continued as if nothing happened. But you knew it was too late. The inspection ended, and you stood waiting for feedback as usual, but this time no one approached. The instructor glanced at you out of the corner of his eye, said nothing, and turned away. That evening, you were summoned to the teacher's office. No witnesses, no tea, just you and a sheet of paper laid out on the table, next to a sealed envelope with your name written in stern black ink, and 3 words you never thought you'd see: notice from the clan. The teacher didn't speak right away. He let you sit in silence for 5 minutes, letting the smell of ink seep into your brain, letting your own breathing become the only sound in the room. Then he spoke. Do you know where you went wrong? You nodded, didn't dare speak. He nodded back, placing the envelope in your hands. Take it home. Read it with your parents. This isn't punishment. It's a reminder. You returned home, crossing the dark courtyard like a thief carrying evidence of your own crime. Your father opened the letter, read it silently, then set it on the table without looking at you, only asking, "What do you plan to do next?" You didn't know. You wanted to say, "I'll learn from this," but that phrase was meaningless here. Learning is for those who still have a chance, and you were standing on the edge of losing everything. Your mother stayed silent, not a single pitying glance, because pity in samurai culture is an insult. The next morning, you returned to the dojo with the letter signed, confirming you had read, understood, and accepted. You presented it to the teacher with both hands, bowing 45 degrees, not a fraction off. But a mistake isn't erased by a perfect bow. From that day, you were placed in the needs supervision group, trained separately, barred from public tests. Your name was mentioned before class, with a slight pause in the tone. Yoshitada will observe this lesson from the back. It sounded normal, but you knew it was the polite way of saying, unworthy. At communal meals, you were seated at the end of the table. You were removed from the list for the Spring Festival performance team. Every time you touched your sword, your hand slowed, not because you were weak, because you were afraid of messing up again. Afraid one wrong move would get you fully expelled, your name recorded in the unworthy of the bloodline list. Because here, mistakes didn't earn deductions. They earned whips, scoldings, double-length meditation sessions without explanation, friends' eyes that changed color, teachers who no longer met your gaze when giving instructions, and whispers as you passed the training yard. One who betrays a single beat will betray an entire battle. You didn't betray, you just missed half a beat. But missing half a beat, in a place where every movement is a sacred ritual, was enough to be seen as a crack in your honor. You tried twice as hard, practiced strikes while others rested, wrote the Bushido oath at night, meditated until your legs went numb, but effort wasn't rewarded, because restoring honor isn't a process, it's a gift, and you had no right to ask for it. One day, you were called for a surprise test. No warning, no notice. You stepped into the center of the dojo, with no scorn in the eyes watching you, but no trust either. You took your stance, focused, didn't breathe heavily, and this time, you struck true, straight, decisive, as if the sword were an extension of your spine. At the end, the teacher didn't nod, but he didn't turn away either. He only said, "Progress." 2 words, shorter than a wound, but enough to let you stand a little taller. Still, that letter remained in your room, a reminder, a shadow, a stain that never washes clean. You no longer believed in fairness, but you believed in not making another mistake. Because here, mistakes aren't fixed with words. A mistake is a stroke of ink in your honor record, and you, from now on, would live as if every step were on a blade, never letting it cut your feet. Tomorrow, you'll be given a new task, standing by the Lord, as a young attendant, prestigious, but stand half a step out of place, or speak when not asked, and it's enough to have a sword drawn on you in the hall. And that time, there won't be a warning letter, only blood. When you were called to the dojo's main office and heard the teacher say, "You've been chosen as a young attendant for the Lord," you thought you'd taken a big step on the path of honor. Your mind instantly pictured samurai standing behind the Lord, armor gleaming, eyes resolute, hands resting lightly on sword hilts, exuding a quiet majesty that made everyone bow. But you forgot one crucial thing: that majestic image is just a shell. Beneath it is suffocating tension, absolute discipline, the duty to carry another's life on your shoulders. And the truth is, one half-step mistake, and you'd be dead before you realized you'd erred. On your first day entering the Lord's residence, you didn't walk, you were led. 2 armored guards escorted you to the gate, checked every item you carried, even your headband, before letting you enter the main hallway. Each step echoed with the precise clack of wooden sandals, like knocks on the door to a world where mistakes aren't allowed. You were given an attendant's uniform, no flair, no gleaming armor, just a gray kimono, black sash, and a short wakizashi at your right hip. "You don't need a long sword," the head attendant said. "If you need to use a sword, you've already failed. Your job was to stand in the right place, at the right time, in the right posture. No looking around, no heavy breathing, no reacting to shouts, laughter, cries, sighs, or any movement not from the Lord. You were a shadow, a post, a figure upholding order. One day, during an audience, you stood behind the Lord's chair, to the right. He was hearing a report about horse theft in a neighboring province. The messenger's hands shook, his voice faltered. You didn't dare turn, but you saw clearly. Sweat dripped from his neck onto the wooden floor. A swish sounded. The attendant to your left half drew his sword. The messenger dropped to his knees, forehead hitting the floor. The Lord raised a hand lightly. The sword returned to its sheath. The audience continued, as if nothing happened. You couldn't breathe, but you had to stand still. At noon you ate, not in the kitchen, but in a private restroom for attendants. Cold rice, oiled vegetables. No one spoke. No one chewed loudly. One wrong word could get you removed from the attendant list the next day, maybe forever. One night, the Lord couldn't sleep. He went to the courtyard, walked. 3 attendants followed, silent, matching his every step. The night wind cut your neck like a blade. You shivered but didn't dare tighten your robe. Once, he stopped, turned to look at a pine tree. You stopped too, at the right distance, in the right stance, eyes forward. If you looked at him, it was rude. If you bowed, it was weak. If you seemed distracted, it was disrespectful. After 3 minutes staring at the pine, he walked on. You exhaled so softly you couldn't hear yourself. A month as an attendant, you learned glory isn't standing near power, it's surviving each day without being noticed. Because being noticed means you didn't do well. One day, the Lord met a court envoy. The meeting was tense as a bowstring. As the guest left, you stepped back half a beat slower than the attendant beside you. Just half a beat, but enough to be noted in the attitude evaluation log. No one punished you. But the next day, you were moved from near the Lord's chair to the far corner by the back gate. No explanation, but you understood. You just stepped 1 foot out of trust's boundary. You tightened up. From then on, you arrived half an hour early each day. Polished swords for the team before anyone asked. Practiced standing without blinking. Practiced holding your breath for 5 seconds whenever the Lord moved. You learned to read his breathing rhythm, his hand turns, the sound of his robe brushing the floor. You weren't a person, you were a living sensor, and you had to be perfect. One day, a stranger burst into the residence. A drunk man, yelling, swinging a stick. 3 attendants surrounded him. You stood in his path, never trained for a real situation. Your hand touched your sword hilt, then stopped, because you remembered, if you need to use a sword, you've already failed. You didn't draw, instead you raised a hand to block him, using the balanced stance you'd learned not to attack, only to stop. He stumbled, fell, other attendants tied him up. The Lord stepped out, looked at you, said nothing, but the next day you were moved back to your old spot, near the throne, through praise, but you understood, you'd played your role right. No strike, no retreat, no trembling. You went home, placed your sword on its stand, bowed deeper than usual, because now you understood, being an attendant isn't glory, it's bearing life and death. And every day you still stood was a day you didn't fail. Tomorrow, Kuma, you'll learn the final ritual, not to live, but to die correctly. Seppuku, no rehearsal, no practice, only one chance, if the time comes, and you must be ready now. You were summoned to the meditation room behind the dojo one weak sun afternoon, when the light on the porch turned ashen and everything was still, as if the wind itself held its breath. No one explained why, but when you saw a white mat spread in the center of the room, beside a short dagger wrapped in black silk, you knew today was the seppuku training, the ritual of self-disembowelment to preserve honor, a ritual no one hopes to use, but everyone must learn, because a samurai must never die in disgrace without slicing their own abdomen to say, I take responsibility. You didn't sit alone. 12 peers sat around you, silent. A monk stood at the head of the room, hands clasped, eyes lowered. The instructor stepped forward, his voice hoarse, needing no volume, from now until the end of your lives. If you do something that makes you unworthy of living, this is how you atone. Then he pointed to the dagger. No shouting, no groaning, no staining the mat with tears. You looked at the dagger, not longer than a handspan, its steel blade, gleaming from regular oiling, its handle wrapped in black silk, simple to the point of chilling. The first person stepped forward. He bowed, sat on the mat, removed his robe, exposing his abdomen. Another student stood behind, holding his shoulders, acting as the kaishakunin, the one to behead, if the disemboweler fails to complete the duty. But today was practice, no beheading, just slicing. He placed the dagger before him, bowed, took a deep breath, then held it with both hands. No complaints, no final words, just one motion, a slice from left to right, a handspan long, cutting through the white cloth, not skin, just to simulate. But the eyes weren't fake, the sweat wasn't fake, the steady hand was the truest thing. You watched, throat dry. The second person went, and then the third. When your turn came, your hands were cold as metal. You knelt on the mat, feeling the wooden floor beneath your knees like a warning. You removed your robe, baring your abdomen. You bowed to the dagger. You touched it. The handle was rough, coarse, not comforting, like the soft cloth you once imagined. You took a deep breath, raised the dagger, placed its blade against your stomach, over the cloth, imagining flesh. Your hand began to move. One horizontal line, slow, clear, not too deep, but not half-hearted. You heard the fabric tear. You didn't think, didn't blink, didn't tremble. When the slice was done, you bowed again, then set the dagger down. The room was deathly silent. No praise, no applause. The instructor only nodded slightly. Not bad, a bit hesitant on the first cut. If real, you'd suffer more than necessary. You nodded, no excuses, because here, hesitation is failure. You returned to your place. The next person went. Each turn was a confrontation with what no one wants to think about. Death isn't the failure. Dying without fulfilling your role is the true shame. After the session, you were given a small paper illustrations of abdominal cuts. 3 types, horizontal from left to right, basic, cross-shaped, advanced, and inverted T, for when there's absolutely no one to assist in ending it. You read it, folded it, tucked it into your robe, like someone keeping a map, for when there's nothing left to hold on to. That night, you sat alone behind the house, the air cold, but but you felt colder inside. You weren't afraid of death. What chilled you was realizing, one day, you might have to use your own hands to end it all, not for failure, but for the belief that living on would insult honor. You placed a hand on your stomach, imagining the real sensation, no pain, just heavy. Then, you looked at the sky, not for philosophy, but to ensure that, if it came to that, you'd at least remember there was a sky above you. You spoke to no one that day. The whole group was silent, as if everyone had just emerged from the deepest part of themselves and hadn't found the way back. The next day, the dojo returned to normal. Swords swung, teachers shouted, you meditated, but something had changed. In each other's eyes, you saw it. Everyone had touched death, and living on wasn't instinct anymore. It was a choice, a silent oath. If the time comes, I won't back down. Tomorrow, you'll be taken to a training battlefield, no longer a simulation. Dust, blood, one wrong step, and you're not scolded, you're stabbed, and you'll have to remember everything you've learned, even the final cut, if needed. You were ordered to join a training ambush, one foggy morning, when the third watch drum still echoed from afar, and the ground was so cold, each step felt like treading on a vow. This wasn't a mock exercise, not cutting straw, not slicing cloth. This was a real tactical simulation, with real people, real weapons, but no fatalities allowed. It sounded like a controlled, dangerous game, but the truth was, anyone who didn't block in time, didn't dodge in time, or struck harder than permitted, could leave a lifelong scar, if they even made it back to the dojo. You weren't warned beforehand. You only heard the teacher say, "Bring your sword, the real one." Your hand lightly touched the scabbard at your hip, the first katana you were allowed to use outside rituals. It was heavy, not from metal, but because you knew this was no longer a symbol. It was a tool that could cause pain, could end lives, and you would wield it. Your team had 4 members. You were in the back. In the forest, the sound of dry leaves underfoot was faint as breathing, but you heard every step of your teammates clearly. From the bushes ahead, a huff sounded. Someone charged out, a mock enemy, a senior student playing a rebel. No signal given. All reactions had to be instinct. The leader blocked, the second dodged, the third countered. Your turn, an attacker came from the left. You didn't think, didn't shout. You drew your sword, turned your wrist, and slashed, a clean diagonal from shoulder to hip, just as you'd practiced thousands of times. The blade hit the opponent's armor, wood wrapped in leather, but you heard a short screech, and then blood, not much. A red streak oozed from a gap in the armor under his arm. You knew you'd cut deeper than allowed. He staggered, stepped back, didn't collapse, but blood flowed, and in that moment your heart stung, not from regret, but because you felt something, the feeling of drawing real blood for the first time, from your hand. You looked into his eyes. He gritted his teeth, nodded slightly, as if to say, "Well done," then retreated, withdrawing from the fight. You stood there, sword still dripping blood, hands still wet, heart still shaking, but you couldn't stop. A shout rang out, "Continue," and you continued, blocked, dodged, slashed. Each swing buried what you were feeling, because here, emotions couldn't show. No shuddering at the sight of blood, no regret for striking someone, no hesitation for causing pain. An attendant observed from afar, cold eyes, taking notes. You knew one glance at the sky, one tremble of the hand, one pause because of blood, and you'd be marked, unready, one who let heart interfere with blade, and that was worse than a wound. After the match, you cleaned your sword. The steel was wet, your eyes were dry, no one spoke. The person you cut was bandaged, didn't blame you. He passed by, lightly patted your shoulder. "Nice hit," he said. You nodded, didn't smile, didn't thank, didn't apologize, just nodded, like a machine executing its programming correctly. That night, you were listed as a combat candidate. You didn't feel joy, didn't feel sorrow, only felt your hand, still smelling of metal. You washed 3 times, but the sensation lingered, not on your skin, in your heart. You meditated an extra hour, not for discipline, but to calm the tremor humming in your chest. You remembered the eyes of the one you cut, the blood on your wrist, the teacher's distant voice. Don't let your hand shake, don't tilt your head, don't doubt. You did it right, but what's right in the samurai world allows no room to feel anything but continue. And so you continued. No groans, no complaints, no showing anything but technique. And you told yourself, the feeling will fade, blood will stop feeling new, fear will become familiar, and emotions will lie still. Next, you'll be given a solo task. A young samurai walking between two hostile factions, not to kill, but to stay silent, and in that silence, you'll hear the dagger stab into your own trust of yourself. Honor is the first thing you learn, the last thing you hold, and the thing repeated so often, it becomes the background rhythm in your mind. No questions, no debate. Every day, at least 27 times, you hear for honor, to keep honor. If you still have honor, don't tarnish honor. As if honor is an invisible cloak, every samurai must wear for life, even if it strangles you until you can't breathe. Your teacher said, honor is the only thing left when you've lost everything. Your father said, a man without honor is as good as dead. Your older dojo friend once told you, I'd rather be cut down than despised. And you listen, memorize, repeat, every day, without fail. For one moment, during evening meditation in an empty room, with the wind hissing through the door's cracks, like whispers from another world, you ask yourself, is honor truly worth it? Worth the pain, the restraint, the silence when misunderstood, worth dying without justification? That morning, you were sent with a group of attendants to a border village, where a dispute over rice fields had erupted between two clans loyal to the Lord. You weren't the leader. You were only told to follow, observe, and remember how a samurai maintains order. When you arrived, both sides were lined up, faces red, eyes blazing, hands already on the handles of hoes and sickles, as if a bloody battle would break out over a few inches of mud. Your group's leader stepped forward, raised a hand, and said clearly, the first to strike betrays honor. One sentence, enough to make both sides pause, but only pause. The next words were, if you cause chaos, we will enforce the law. The law, meaning execution, and so, silence stretched on. Meanwhile, you were assigned to stand guard at the boundary. No speaking, no intervening, just watching. And so, you stood there, nearly 3 hours, under the sun, watching both sides seethe with anger, but forced to stay silent for the sake of saving face for the Lord. A child, about 12, from side A, threw a clump of dirt across the line. It didn't hit anyone, but it grazed the robe of an elder from side B. Immediately, a young man from B drew a sickle, lunged forward. The child, terrified, backed away, falling into the mud. You saw you were close enough to stop it, but you weren't allowed because you hadn't been ordered. And acting without orders is overstepping, and overstepping is disrespectful. You stood, didn't move. The head attendant finally intervened, knocking the young man down. The situation calmed. The child stood, covered in mud, eyes red. He looked at you, straight at you, as if asking, why didn't you save me? You turned away, didn't answer. That night, back at the outpost, you didn't sleep. You sat cleaning your sword, but your hand didn't touch the metal. Your mind touched that look, the gaze that made you feel soiled, not because you were wrong, but because you were right by the rules, and that made you feel wrong as a human. You quietly asked your teacher, indirectly, if honor demands we stay silent, but our heart says to speak, who should we listen to? He was silent for a long time, then answered, a heart doesn't die from one silence, but honor dies forever. If you betray it once, you nodded, as always. But this time, a small crack formed in your mind, and through it, the light of doubt began to leak in. The next day, you lived by the rules again, bowed at the right angle, struck in the right direction, meditated in the right posture. No one doubted you, but you began to doubt, not the way, but the way it swallowed the last human part of you. And when night fell, you wrote in your mind a sentence you'd never dare say aloud. If honor won't let me cry when I need to, won't let me save when I see danger, won't let me speak when my conscience screams, is it worth it? Next, you'll be chosen as a messenger, not to deliver letters, but to carry your head through enemy territory, holding a secret you can't speak. And if caught, you must bite your tongue, not for pain, but to keep what's called honor, something you're starting to feel isn't so certain anymore. You weren't allowed to dream, taught early on, almost one of the first lessons after how to hold a sword. Dreaming leaves you open, your teacher said. A warrior doesn't live on imagination, only on discipline. You nodded, memorized, etched it into your brain like a taboo. And by day, you lived exactly like that. Back straight, eyes cold, sword steady, mind unmoved. But at night, when the candle went out, when the insects began whispering things no one taught, your mind quietly slipped from the machine-like body, forged by training, and you began to dream, not of victory, not of being promoted, not of cutting down an enemy on the battlefield. You dreamed you were ordinary. Someone who didn't need to bow 45 degrees, didn't need to calculate angles entering a room, didn't need to live with a sword at their cheek. Someone who could lie on a mat without being called lazy, who could breathe heavily, sneeze, or laugh loudly without being deemed rude. In that dream, you saw yourself running, not for training, but for joy, barefoot on soft grass, arms spread, mouth laughing, behind you a group of friends you never really had. People without swords, without hakama, wearing plain cloth, shouting nonsense that somehow felt so light. Sometimes, you dreamed of farming, plowing earth, planting vegetables, sweating not to prove anything, just to earn a hot meal. You sat under a tree, drank from a gourd, wiped your brow, no one judging if the wipe followed protocol, no one noting you said an extra word today, no one demanding you meditate to control sleepiness. Once, you dreamed of a summer evening. You sat in a small house, crickets outside. Someone was beside you. You didn't know their face, their name, only that you trusted them. No need for caution, no need for defense, no need to control your gaze. Just sitting, drinking tea, talking about things unrelated to honor, duty, or life and death obligations. Then you woke, always like that, always waking at the softest moment, and the dawn's light, cold as a bucket of water to the face, pulled you back to reality. You weren't allowed to dream. You were never taught how to live without honor. You were never permitted to think you could be anyone but the keeper of the sword's way. So you hid the dream, like a painting drawn in smoke. Each time you meditated, you tried to push it out of your mind. But sometimes, in moments too quiet, it slipped back in, a different you, laughing, hair loose, hands muddy, unafraid, unworried, not planning an escape route in your head. You once asked your teacher, "What if I don't want to be a samurai?" He looked at you long, then said, "You were born for it. Wanting or not, isn't something to consider." And you nodded, because there was no other choice. But deep inside you knew, it wasn't that you didn't want to be a samurai, you just wanted to know what it felt like to live as an ordinary person. Just once, no sword, no burden, no risk of having to disembowel yourself for a mistake. Just living, simply, even once would do. But then you stood, dressed correctly, tied your sash in place, held your sword at the right angle, and stepped into the training yard as always. No one knew you dreamed. No one needed to. Dreams weren't for telling. Dreams were for knowing you were still human, not yet stone. Tomorrow, you'll be placed in the suicide squad. Not because you're the best, but because you're the quietest. And to them, silence means you're ripe enough to die for something no one dares question. Is it truly necessary? You received your first katana on an autumn morning, when the wind blew through the dojo courtyard, sounding like tearing silk, cold, long, and decisive, like your own fate. The ceremony was plain. No gongs, no drums, just you, your teacher, and a black lacquered box, placed on the clan altar. "You're ready for a real sword," the teacher said, his hand lightly touching the box's lid, his eyes fixed on you, as if measuring whether you were steady enough to hold something that could not only cut flesh, but also sever your future with one wrong swing. You knelt, bowed, and received the box with both hands, like accepting a child not born of you, but one you must raise until death. When you opened the lid, the steel gleamed in the early light. Your katana, forged from triple-layered steel, its blade thin and curved like a bird slicing the wind, the spine etched with a small clan symbol, the handle wrapped in black cord, the hilt plain with no ornament, only a white cloth, lightly tied at the end, symbolizing a vow you never spoke aloud. Your hand touched the hilt. The feeling was unlike any wooden sword or bokken you'd held, not because it was heavier, but because it lived. It wasn't cold as you expected. It was warm, like a breathing creature. You gripped it lightly, no trembling, but something in your heart sank, not because you feared cutting, but because you realized this was no longer a symbol. This was an irrevocable commitment. You stood, strapped the sword to your left hip, walked with steps, no longer those of a student. Each step, You heard the scabbard tap your belt. Each movement, you felt a weight, not just at your hip, but in your heart. You crossed the courtyard. Everyone watched. No one spoke. Their eyes held something both distant and close, as if they'd all been through this moment and knew that from here, you were no longer your old self. But you didn't feel honor, didn't feel pride. You felt empty, so empty. You wondered, why don't I feel anything? You dreamed of this day for years, but now with a real blade resting near your veins, it didn't feel like part of you. It felt like carrying another soul, something ancient, heavy and silent as a mountain. That night, you sat alone, removed the sword, placed it on your lap, and stared at the blade reflecting candlelight. You ran your hand along it, not touching the edge, just the spine where it doesn't cut, but bears every vibration. You whispered, "Do you accept me?" No answer, but in that silence, you felt you'd asked the wrong question. It wasn't the sword that needed to accept you. You needed to become worthy of the sword. Your teacher once said, "A katana isn't a weapon, it's a soul forged by the hands of the dead." Back then, you thought it was a metaphor. Now you understood. Every sword carries a history of hands that held it, blood it drew, mistakes made, deaths witnessed, but never spoken of. And you, with this first sword, had just become the next to bear that burden. You didn't sleep, didn't dare, afraid you'd lie wrong, knock the blade from its place, and that would be disrespectful. So you stayed awake, holding the sword like a wild child, loved, feared, wanting to understand, but not knowing where to start. The next morning, you practiced your first kana with a real katana. No more wooden swords, no teacher standing close to guide, just you, the sword, and the wind. You swung, one cut, clear, but not right. The teacher didn't speak, just stepped forward, took your hand, squeezed lightly. You're still thinking. A katana doesn't need a thinker, it needs someone who doesn't resist. You swung again, this time, your hand looser, shoulders relaxed. The cut moved so fast you heard the air tear before seeing the blade pass your sight. And that's when you understood. To wield a katana right, you must become empty. No fear, no regret. Don't think you're holding a weapon. Think you're doing what must be done. But that emptiness scared you, because the better you cut, the less you felt human, as if each swing left a piece of you behind. And you began to understand. This sword wasn't your soul, it was the soul of what you must become. Tomorrow, you'll use this katana in a real test, protecting someone, stopping wrong actions, and maintaining order at all costs. No hints, no rehearsals, and if you fail, that sword will be what ends you, because it doesn't allow itself to be held by someone who can't bear its weight. Your first task wasn't to fight in battle, hunt a traitor, defend a fortress, or save someone dying. No, you were assigned to collect taxes. Yes, taxes. It sounded like clerical work a scribe could handle, but you soon realized in the samurai world, even counting rice sacks or cloth rolls was a test of loyalty, patience, situational handling, and above all, the ability to uphold honor without becoming a tyrant. You were summoned to the command room at dawn, where the Lord himself gave the task. Nakatomi village is short 30 sacks of rice from last term. Go there. Clarify. No blood must be shed. But if anyone resists, act with measure. Those last 3 words, act with measure, rang like a paradox. Throughout your training, you were taught to cut decisively, kill without trembling, handle things thoroughly. But now, you were asked to be soft within a hard frame, firm within decorum, and absolutely not let anyone lose face, not even those dodging taxes. You rode to the village with 2 escorts. No banners, no drums. Just 3 silent figures on a dusty dirt road where children stopped playing, adults stood, and every eye turned to you, as if you were there to remind them of what no one wanted to face. Det. The village chief greeted you, old, hunched, hands trembling, but eyes sharp. You bowed exactly 30 degrees, per protocol, then opened the tax scroll. 30 sacks of rice, last term met, this term short, you said, voice neither hard nor soft. The chief said the land was poor, rain scarce, rats plentiful, people hungry, sick. You didn't argue, but a list is a list. Short is short, and your task wasn't to pity. It was to record, handle, and preserve honor for both sides. You requested to inspect the storehouse, old, dirt-floored, musty, but cleaner than expected. There was rice, not much, but not there. Something felt off, but you couldn't interrogate like a soldier. You had to use reason. Part of you wanted to draw your sword, place it on the table, lightly, not threatening, just enough to remind you weren't a scribe, but you didn't. You recalled your teacher's words. Creating fear is easy. Earning respect is hard. You asked to summon all household heads. When they came, you presented the numbers, offered a solution. If you can't pay full rice, you can substitute with cloth, firewood, or labor service. Someone protested. This village has paid 2 harvests in a row. We're exhausted. You didn't reply. You just opened the book, pointed to the Lord's handwritten line. No shortfall allowed. No one said more. Finally one stood. My house has rice. I'll pay first. Then a second. Then a third. Though not the full 30 sacks, you got 19. The rest, you recorded, sealed, and promised to request the Lord consider deferring for 1 term. No one clapped. No one knew you were sweating under your robe. But as you turned to leave the village, you heard children playing again. You didn't know if you did right, but at least no blood was shed. For that night, you wrote your report, hand trembling slightly, not from fatigue, but because you'd never had to use your head so much to avoid using your sword. You realized sometimes the battlefield has no banners. It's a small room with tired, hungry, prideful people. And if you're not careful, one word could spark a fire that burns an entire clan's honor. You weren't praised, just a stamp, received. But for you, that was enough. Next, you'll be called to escort a group from Edo. People who don't believe in samurai, who think honor is just a painted facade. And you, with your sword at your hip, will have to learn to hold both your faith and your silence when insulted to your core. No cutting, no arguing, just standing. The test match was held as part of the welcoming ritual for the samurai delegation from Edo, men of true rank, titled, battle-tested, who had killed, survived chaos, and now carried an aura you once thought you were nearing. You were chosen to represent the dojo's young group, an honor, but also a sweet trap everyone knew. Lose, and it's a lesson. Win, and no one believes it. Your opponent was a middle-aged samurai named Shinzo, tall, not burly, not overly agile, but something in his eyes made you feel like a child who'd never held a sword. The match didn't use real blades, but the bokken that day wasn't light, and every strike was allowed to stop short of breaking bones, meaning breaking was still possible. You took your stance, eyes forward, back straight, hands gripping the wooden sword's hilt until your knuckles whitened. You told yourself, this is the moment to prove it. Shinzo stood opposite, silent, giving a slight nod, as if accepting you, but also weighing the foolishness you were about to reveal. The command sounded, and you lunged. Fast, precise, as you'd trained. Your first swing, aimed at his left shoulder, a feigned strike, but forceful enough to make the air his. But your sword didn't hit its mark. Shinzo shifted half his body, dodging by half a step, then tapped the back of your hand with his bokken's hilt. Your hand went numb. You stepped back, adjusted. But before you could settle, he was close. Not fast, but timed to the beat. Your heart just missed. A sweep at your leg, a horizontal slash at your waist. You blocked, but you lost rhythm. And when you tried to counter, his sword was at your throat, light as a feather, heavy as a mountain. The first match ended in under 30 seconds. You weren't hurt, but you couldn't stand steady. Shinzo stepped back, bowed slightly. Good, then turned away. You bowed deeper, not for courtesy, but to hide the eyes burning with a mix of shame and awe. In the afternoon, the second match. This time, you didn't rush. You waited, watched his movements, but everything he did was like a stroll. One step left, you thought it was an opening. You lunged. He slashed upward, knocking your sword like a leaf off a branch. You spun half your body. He didn't strike again. He let you stand, as if giving you a chance to see your mistake. The third time, you tried a new technique, misdirect with your eyes, trip before striking. He looked at you like he'd seen this before you were born. Then he struck your shoulder. One clean hit. Not hard, but it left you breathless for seconds. Third loss. No one laughed. No one whispered. But you saw clearly, you were far, very far. After the match, you were called alone to the guest room. Shinzo sat drinking tea. His eyes looked out at the courtyard. He didn't blame you, didn't criticize. He only asked, "Do you know why you lost?" You paused, then said, "Because I wasn't fast enough." He shook his head. "Because you still want to prove something. One who wants to prove swings for their heart, not their blade." You didn't fully understand, but you nodded, because you knew you'd just learned something. No class teachers facing failure when no one demands an explanation. Just you and your shattered ego. That night, you sat cleaning your bokken. No blood, but sweat, bitterness. A view of yourself you'd avoided. You weren't as good as you thought, not as steady as you hoped. And honor didn't shield you from defeat in front of others. It only taught you to stand afterward without losing yourself. Next, you'll be summoned to meet a stranger, an official without a sword, but with eyes sharp enough to make you feel exposed. He'll ask, "What do you live for?" And you, for the first time, won't answer right away. You were labeled of age, at 16, when the dojo began addressing you as an adult, when younger students bowed deeper as you passed, when teachings shifted from commands to silent expectations that you knew, understood, and embodied the tradition without repetition. You started attending meetings with group leaders, were asked opinions on arranging personnel, provisions, training for new students. You were tasked with overseeing 2 10-year-olds, teaching them meditation, proper sitting, how to bow without trembling shoulders. You didn't find it strange, didn't feel surprised. You only felt empty, a shapeless void somewhere in your chest, cold, hollow, like stepping into a room where everyone expects you, but you don't know when you were invited. One evening, standing guard outside the Lord's residence, hand resting lightly on your sword hilt, breeze gentle, moon high, you suddenly looked up and realized you couldn't recall a single childhood memory. No playing in mud, no splashing water and getting scolded by your mother, no hug where you didn't stand rigid, no laugh not cut off by a shush. You remembered at 11, secretly keeping a stray cat in the firewood shed. You hid it for 2 nights, fed it leftover rice, named it Yuki. On the 3rd night, someone in the house found out, told your father. The next morning, you were called to the courtyard, made to kneel. The cat was taken. No one spoke, but your father asked one question. "What do you think a samurai needs to nurture to grow strong?" You didn't dare answer. He continued, "Certainly not weakness." From that day, you nurtured nothing. No cats, no hopes, nothing. You lived correctly, upright, precisely, like a wooden statue carved so well it forgot it was once a tree. Now you were of age. You could go to battle, could wield a sword to kill without specific permission from your teacher. You could voice opinions, though in a low tone, eyes not direct. You could be chosen to guard the Lord on special nights, and you could be called at any moment, without refusal, to die. You saw people look at you with respect.
But no one asked.
"Are you okay?" No one asked, "Do you dream?" No one asked, "Have you ever been happy?" They didn't ask, because no one had ever asked them either. You looked at the children you were teaching, smaller versions of yourself, trying to keep backs straight, heads bowed, feet still in meditation. One asked, "Teacher, when can I play again?" You meant to say after class, but then remembered asking that question once, and no one answered. You looked at him a moment, then said, "Playing is also training. Train to play, where no one sees." He looked confused, but nodded. You turned away, felt something crack lightly in your heart. Another night, you sat writing a report. Outside, village children laughed. Free, uneven, unrestrained laughter. You heard it, and felt it was foreign, like a sound from another world. And then you realized it was something you never had, not because it was forbidden, but because you never thought of it. Your childhood wasn't a phase. It was a period of training to step into the main role, and you'd played it so well, you forgot who you were before the role. You once heard a Western merchant say, "Childhood is a time to explore oneself." You didn't understand, didn't dare ask, because for you, the self wasn't for exploring. It was for forging into something others could rely on. And now you were that thing, a person of age, but ageless. No carefree beginning, no dreamy middle, just a structure solid as the sword you carried. In the morning, you looked in the mirror, saw eyes no longer surprised by a new day, saw shoulders used to an invisible weight, saw a heart still calm, but a calm like a lake never touched by a stone, not deep, but untested. Tomorrow you'll be ordered to kill someone, for the first time, not to learn, not to intimidate, but to prove you belong to a place with no way back, and you must strike decisively. No questions, no waiting, no regrets. You are now a true samurai, recognized, respected, called by name in important meetings, and looked upon by younger generations with eager eyes, as if you were the model they must follow. You walk through the dojo courtyard, and people bow. You stand in the Lord's residence, and people fall silent. You hold your katana, and people trust you'll strike true, straight, unwavering. You're no longer a student, no longer checked for the angle of your bow, no longer asking if you did right, because now you are the standard for the younger ones to emulate, and you know, by every definition of the world you live in, you've succeeded. But there's a question no one asks you. It floats in your mind like an ember that hasn't yet faded. What have you sacrificed? The first time that question rang clear was after a mission to deal with a rebel, a former soldier who once served the Lord, now caught forming a vigilante group in a neighboring village. He didn't attack anyone, didn't call for uprising. He only gathered the poor, redistributed land as he saw fit, saying justice wasn't just in written orders, but he was deemed a threat. And you, yes, you were tasked with handling it. Not to arrest, not to advise, to kill. You arrived at the village in the afternoon, alone, not because you were solitary, but because the Lord trusted you were skilled enough to clean up without aid. You found him in a thatched hut. He didn't flee, didn't beg, he just looked at you, as if he'd known this was coming. You're still young, he said. You can still change. You didn't respond. You had no right to. You only gripped your sword hilt, and you struck. One swing. Decisive. No mistake. No deviation. Exactly as taught. Then you bowed, wiped your sword, washed your hands, wrote the report, and left the village in silence. No one watched. No one stopped you. But that night, alone in your room, your hand wasn't cold anymore. It was hot, like fire, like it was burning. Not from the blade, but because, for the first time, you asked yourself, if he didn't resist, didn't kill, only broke the rules, what did you kill him to protect? Honor, order, or something you never chose, but had tied to your hand the day you learned to hold a sword? You thought back on the years. What had you sacrificed? You gave up childhood, never played. You gave up affection, never loved. You gave up emotions, never cried without being seen as weak. You gave up freedom, never chose. And most importantly, you gave up the ability to question, because every question was replaced by duty. Every who am I was crushed by what must I do. And now, with everything title, real sword, authority, trust, you felt emptier than ever. A void no one saw, no one mentioned, no one allowed you to fill, because you were no longer a person. You were a symbol, and symbols don't shake their heads, don't waver, don't err. You are a true samurai, but the price you paid was yourself. In the final part, you'll stand between two choices, not life or death, but to continue or to stop, and no one will force you, but no one will save you if you choose wrong. Finally, you sit in meditation, not to clear your mind, not to prepare for a mission, not for discipline or curriculum. No teacher behind you, no one timing you, no wooden clapper, no rules, just you, alone, in an old wooden room, the lantern extinguished, the door slightly ajar, letting cold wind dry the lingering thoughts. You sit, back straight but not rigid, eyes half closed, not trying to suppress any thought, because for the first time, you don't want to chase anything away. You want to remember, not to hurt, but to understand, to, for the last time in a life framed by blades and oaths, touch something softer, truer, that once belonged to you. You recall the first early morning you stepped into the dojo, how you looked up at the wooden sign, trembling with fear, excitement, and ignorance, that from that day, every breath would be counted. Tied you recall, the first time you held a wooden sword, tiny hands gripping what seemed harmless, then being knocked flat, and the teacher's voice, cold as winter wind. You don't need to be fast, you need to know why you hold the sword. You recall the first time you saw blood, not yours, but another's, splashing your face, dripping on your hand, soaking your robe, and you didn't dare wipe it, not from courage, but because you didn't know if you were allowed. You recall being called a true samurai. People congratulated, patted your shoulder, nodded, but you stood there, heart empty, as if all you'd sacrificed to get here was never acknowledged. You recall the dreams, the ones you tried to forget. Dreams of being ordinary, sitting in a small kitchen, hands grabbing hot rice, no one checking your posture. Dreams of running for joy, not training. Dreams of loving someone without wondering if it betrayed the code. Dreams of crying without being called weak. You recall that little cat, Yuki, the way it looked at you before being taken. You recall crying inside, but keeping a stern face as demanded. You recall the first time you asked yourself, "What if I don't want to strike?" And the clear memory of answering, "Wanting doesn't matter." You recall so much, and all those memories don't line up, don't follow order. They flow into you like a chaotic stream, cold, then warm, then cold again. You keep meditating, but you're no longer a samurai, no longer a keeper of rituals, no longer a model. For the first time in years, you're just a person, not bound by duty, not carrying a sword, not holding an expressionless face. You're someone who wanted to be asked, "Are you happy?" Though you know no one will. You sit for a long time. The darkness deepens. The smell of old wood, the sound of insects, the wind through the door's crack, all become clearer than the teachings you memorized as a child. And you think, perhaps you never lived, only played a role well. The role of a soldier guarding honor for a generation, the role of a sword that bows. But now, you're not acting. Don't need to act. You're not planning to leave, not rebelling, not declaring anything grand. You just sit, quietly looking back at the path you've walked, at all you've become, and for the first time ask, "Before I was a samurai, what was I?" You don't have a clear answer, but you know you were someone who dreamed, who feared, who wanted to be held, to sing, to hold someone's hand, not to pull them from the ground, but to keep a bit of warmth in your heart. You were a person, and now you're learning that again, in silence, without force, without punishment, without titles, just you, with yourself. And if you ask, is there an end to a samurai's life? There isn't, only a quiet moment, where they sit in meditation, not to become stronger, but to not forget that before everything, they were a child who knew nothing but the desire to live as themselves. In the journey from childhood to adulthood, as a samurai, the character in the story sacrificed nearly all their humanity to achieve perfection in honor, discipline, and obedience. But this cost them their very self, from the moment they were forced to bow exactly 30 degrees and forbidden to cry, to the first time they killed without showing emotion, and finally to meditating, not for clarity, but to recall who they once were. All are sharp cuts, showing the price of living by expectations, without being allowed to question. In modern American society, though no one forces us to carry swords, bow, or disembowel ourselves, many, especially the young, face similar pressures in different forms: perfection, high performance, early success, and always being up to standard. Young people can get caught chasing the image of the ideal child, ideal employee, or ideal citizen, to the point they have no time to ask, "What do I really want?" or "Who am I when I'm not pleasing anyone?" The samurai's story, in the end, doesn't ask, "How strong am I?" but "What did I lose to become this?" And that's the greatest lesson. In modern life, remember that pausing to understand yourself, to feel, to not act on autopilot, isn't weakness, it's necessary. Honor, success, or outward image mean nothing if you no longer recognize the real you in the mirror. Don't wait until you're meditating in silence like that samurai to remember you once knew how to dream. If you see yourself somewhere in the samurai's journey, always striving to be strong, but sometimes forgetting who you were, don't forget to subscribe, to continue joining us in stories of surviving between honor and self. Thank you for listening to the end. See you in the next journey, where you may not need to carry a sword, but still need to hold on to your heart.